Welcome everyone to another episode of Pop Rant Radio, the podcast where two pop culture junkies discuss popular and sometimes not so popular culture. My name is Moss, I'm one of your hosts, and with me as always is my good friend and co-host, Eric. How are you today, sir?
I'm feeling super.
Super? How super are you feeling?
Super soldier serum good.
Are you a hero?
No.
Oh, okay.
I'm chaotic neutral.
Very good. So today we have a fun topic. It's a topic that we've been talking about for a while, and if you like this show, which hopefully you do, you've probably been looking forward towards.
You won't like it anymore.
So this is our episode about the Marvel movies.
Specifically Phase 1.
Yeah, we're going to primarily focus on Phase 1.
Because this would be like a 3-hour podcast.
Yeah, so all the movies before the first Avengers movie. So in previous episodes of the podcast, we have hinted at the fact that we are not the biggest fans of the Marvel movies. And as you're about to find out, we don't think that the Marvel movies are terrible.
Right.
We feel like they definitely fall short.
Yeah, some of them are great.
Yes.
Some of them are really good. They're outstanding films, let alone being a superhero film that's outstanding. But a lot of people kind of give an overall pass to all of them because Iron Man was good. Thus, Iron Man 2 is okay. Or, Captain America Winter Soldier's great. So everyone likes Captain America First Avenger, right? Like, these kind of subpar, I don't want to say mediocre, but close to being mediocre films kind of get a pass because they have that Marvel stamp on it.
Yeah, and again, the movies that we're going to talk about today aren't terrible. They made a lot of money. Like, they were very successful, but
one is terrible.
I feel like a lot of people talk about these movies as if they were just so great. And I think the Marvel franchise, it's kind of getting the point where people are realizing we're kind of getting the same movie over and over and over again. And they've tried to change that a little bit with Winter Soldier kind of being a more, spy movie.
Right.
Iron Man 3 trying to be like a buddy cop movie. And
Guardians kind of being like this goofy trio.
Yeah, ensemble piece. Yeah.
Right.
Some of those films have had more success than others in trying to accomplish that.
Right. Thor Dark World went for a Episode 1 Phantom Menace theme.
But, I think the two movies that kind of emblemize this more than any of the others, Ant-Man and Age of Ultron.
Yes.
Because both of those movies were trying to play things very safe. We've talked about before how, Ant-Man was originally supposed to be directed by Edgar Wright.
Only.
And there are definitely some hints at his contribution to that project.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, we'll never get the Edgar Wright version of Ant-Man. But the version that we got, again, it was very safe. Like, it was very traditional.
Right.
It's basically the same movie as Iron Man 1.
And I mean, again, it's good, not great.
It's fine. Like, it's fine. It's not amazing. It's not terrible.
It's fun to watch, but it's not thought-provoking.
It's fine.
Yeah.
Not a movie I was super impressed by.
It is Iron Man 1.
Yeah, it is Iron Man 1. And Age of Ultron, I think, is an actively bad movie.
Yes.
Like, very poorly edited,
and
poor screenplay.
It's kind of shocking to me that Age of Ultron kind of gets a pass. Like, a lot of people do talk about the Age of Ultron is not that great, but Age of Ultron has this enormous issue that I take with it, that I know a lot of other people take with it, that another superhero film did, and everyone hated it because of it. That's Amazing Spider-Man 2. That movie, everyone blasted it when it came out. They were like, "Oh, all you did was set up for future movies. You didn't even tell a story. This was basically a trailer for, Sinister Six and Amazing Spider-Man 3." That's what Age of Ultron was.
Yeah, exactly. It was the same thing.
But since it was Marvel and since it's, Robert Downey Jr. and Chris Hemsworth, it gets a check mark.
Right, yeah. And then there's definitely some good moments and some good performances in that movie, but overall, yes, the movie really fails on a storytelling level because it essentially, like you just said, sets up the sequels. It sets up the side stories.
It sets up Phase 3.
Yeah, it doesn't really tell a cohesive story, and the parts that are interesting, like the conflict between Steve Rogers and Tony Stark in that movie, all of that is rendered moot at the end of the film because they kind of just undo everything and say, like, they're friends again.
Right. I lead the Avengers. You have a nice car.
Yeah, exactly. It's just, at the end of the day, the movie doesn't do a good job of telling a story, and it's just kind of pointless in the franchise.
Right.
So today we're going to talk about the original kind of Phase 1 Marvel movies and what our problems are with those films. And that's going to kind of lead into a discussion about how what's the broader issue? What's the broader problem with the Marvel movies in general?
Right.
So we're going to start with Iron Man 1. And this is a movie that admittedly I haven't seen in several years.
And I see it quite frequently. It's on TV constantly.
Yeah. What I do really remember about this movie is they do a great job of setting up Tony Stark as a character.
Yep.
They do a really good job of showing his arc going from this kind of like asshole weapons dealer, rich boy kid to becoming this superhero.
Right.
And, you know, his experiences in the Middle East where he has to build the first Iron Man suit with basically scraps. He has to MacGyver it up.
He was in a cave with a box of scraps.
Right.
It's my favorite Jeff Bridges line from that whole movie.
It's impossible. Tony Stark was able to build this in a cave with a box of scraps.
Yeah, exactly. Like you feel that journey.
Yeah.
Like you get to go on this journey with Tony Stark. You know, obviously Robert Downey Jr. his breakout role since his return from, you know, rehabilitation and the drug use. If you didn't see Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, this was, you know, his big return to stardom.
Which, as a friend of ours, Adam, will always point out that Robert Downey Jr. was a perfect pick for Iron Man because their life choices kind of parallel each other.
Yeah, exactly. And also kind of an untraditional choice for Iron Man because the Tony Stark that we get in the Marvel Cinematic Universe is very different than the character that is in the comic books, but it works.
He's more brash in the films and more of like an asshole.
Yeah, he's more sarcastic. And we've talked about this before in our episode about adaptation. And since then, it's okay to change things. It's okay to kind of mold things a little differently as long as you're doing it for the right reasons.
Right.
Or you're keeping the original essence of what the source material conveys. And this was a situation where they really did change the character of Tony Stark, but it made that movie so good because you love Robert Downey Jr. and he is the reason that this entire franchise
kicks it off.
Yeah, he does. And he carries it. You know, and we're going to talk about some other performances that are really, really great as well. But were it not for Robert Downey Jr., like none of this would be here. You know, Jon Favreau and Robert Downey Jr. crafted this original movie that really, like you said, kickstarted the universe and made it viable.
Well, and also, not to poke fun at DC once again, like Iron Man is a very strong film. It paces itself. It tells a nice story. It gives us a hero that we care about. And it doesn't go, hey, this is Avengers part, 0.1, right? Like, the reason why I think DC is having trouble is that Man of Steel wasn't super strong. And if Iron Man wasn't as well done as it turned out to be, I think we'd have a very different picture of the Marvel Universe right now.
Exactly. Iron Man sets up a foundation that allows the rest of the Marvel Universe to be built upon, whereas Man of Steel, the foundation just isn't there. You have the most optimistic, sincere character in all of fiction.
He's the Boy Scout.
I.e. Superman.
Yeah.
And you make him kind of this brooding, moody, not even, murderer, but like almost emotionless. He's Henry Cavill, unfortunately, in those films, he's just a robot.
Yeah.
And you don't get the opportunity to really identify with him or feel with him. And that's a huge dropping of the ball.
Right. I mean, Iron Man is a robot suit, and he has more like human emotions.
Ironically.
Yep.
Ironically.
Ooh, that was horrible.
Not cutting it. So I don't have a lot of negative things to say about Iron Man 1. Again, it's been a long time since I've seen it. Like, it's a very traditional movie. It's very much like, here's our hero, here's the conflict, this is the film. Like, it's not Citizen Kane, it's not Shakespeare. But it doesn't have to be. Well,
and it's got a lot of good moments in it, too, that
it does
really shine as a film. Because a lot of times people will say the classic thing of, well, it's a superhero film.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's a superhero film. It's like it's a negative stamp that they all give on it.
Or it's people use it's just a superhero movie as like a pass.
It's like it's saying it's a kid's film.
Yeah.
It's a kid's film. What do you expect? It's not going to be thought-provoking. And it's like, you can't do that.
Right. It can be, though. It can be so much more.
I mean, like Secret of NIMH or, all these other movies are kids' films. So they tell a good story and they are thought-provoking to kids and adults. So Iron Man just does such an amazing job at not only starting this trend, but breaking the mold of what a comic book movie should be.
Absolutely.
And if it didn't, we wouldn't probably have Civil War. We wouldn't have, Doctor Strange coming out later this year.
And the most important thing, I feel, is that Robert Downey Jr.'s performance and the direction by Jon Favreau, because Jon Favreau wanted Robert Downey Jr. for this role, and the studio didn't.
Yeah, they fought it.
Yeah, they fought it, but Jon Favreau knew.
I think, wasn't it supposed to be, it was like Ryan Gosling was like their number one, or Jake Gyllenhaal or something?
No idea. The Jake Gyllenhaal is the
Jake Gyllenhaal is
quintessential, like, the other guy who's supposed to be cast in a superhero movie.
It's kind of like what Chris Pratt was like a year and a half ago, where it was like, hey, young Han Solo, Chris Pratt.
Right.
Hey, Indiana Jones reboot, Chris Pratt.
Yeah, exactly. But Robert Downey Jr. nails the characterization so well that the audience falls in love with him. And then at that point, it doesn't really matter what the movie is about because you like that character so much that you're willing to watch a movie about a guy who puts on a robot suit and flies around.
Right. Plus, it's really kind of surreal how he deals with like real stuff in that movie.
Yeah.
Like he goes to, I don't remember if it's the Middle East, clearly.
Yeah.
He's in the Middle East, which back when this movie came out, America was very much in the Middle East, and that's all we kept hearing about.
That was obviously the topic at hand.
So it was kind of ballsy of Marvel to be like, hey, let's have him go deal with the Middle East. I mean, sure, he's dealing with the 10 Rings and stuff like that, but you know, people who aren't hardcore comic fans aren't going to know that.
Yeah, and it was a risk. Like it was taking an issue that was very much on the mind of the public and in the news and in the media, and it kind of took a risk on, hey, this is what we're going to base our story around, and that's something that we're going to get into a little bit later, where Marvel just kind of stopped taking risks with their films. So Iron Man 1, overall, pretty decent flick.
Right. So let's go from pretty decent flick to probably, arguably one of the worst in their category, and that is The Incredible Hulk.
Starring Edward Norton.
Starring Edward Norton, and it's so weird that this movie exists, and yet no one who's like big Marvel Universe fan, I imagine none of them have seen it.
Yeah, well, and it's kind of strange because
it's been kind of brushed.
Yeah, it has been brushed off to the side because obviously years before we had the Ang Lee Hulk, which did terribly.
Looked terribly.
It was just, that movie's really, really rough, and like Ang Lee tried to do something very different with like the comic book quote unquote style, and the way that he edited the movie and that sort of thing, and just for most people, it really, really, really didn't work.
It was like a Sin City before Sin City.
Kind of, yeah. And then you have The Incredible Hulk with Edward Norton, who Edward Norton is fantastic.
Absolutely.
Like great actor, you know, one of my favorites.
And Mark Ruffalo, who eventually takes on the mantle, is also very good.
Yeah, also incredible. And
like, I'm going to geek out about Edward Norton when we talk about this, but don't take that as I don't think Mark Ruffalo is a good Bruce Banner.
Right, definitely.
Because he is.
And infamously, this movie, Edward Norton was supposed to have some final say in the editing of this movie.
And this was kind of a first of this that has happened periodically throughout the rest of these films.
And then that didn't happen. Like, for whatever reason, the studio had a disagreement. So... And again, this is one that I haven't seen in a long time, but even after watching it the very first time, I remember like it just being very, very lackluster.
Yeah, I saw it about a year ago. And the thing that really sucks about this movie is it has this amazing concept of not being an origin story. And it's the second Marvel movie and it's not an origin story, and that's really kind of shocking. But it more so tells the story of like what happens after Banner is the Hulk.
Right.
You know, and he's hiding out, he's in Brazil. And he's trying to stay calm. He's taking meditation. He's avoiding stress. He's working a very easy job.
Yeah, it's trying to be the Bruce Banner movie.
Right. And it's like he's constantly dealing with issues that are making him turn into the Hulk instead of like, oh, I have to fight being the Hulk. Like there's none of that existential crap where he's like, maybe I am the Hulk. Like, there's none of that crap.
Yeah, and I think a really important aspect of the Hulk as a character, you know, as we have seen, it's very difficult to make a movie that is about the Hulk or is about Bruce Banner.
Without telling the same story over and over again.
Yeah, and what the Avengers movies have done so well is that they've taken the Hulk and they've placed him in key moments, and he's been really, really effective.
Right.
And I think that a big reason that Incredible Hulk fails, among many other things, is that Edward Norton's Bruce Banner is not surrounded by a strong cast of secondary characters.
Right.
You know, you have Liv Tyler, who's playing a very thankless role in the girlfriend that's worried about Bruce Banner.
Right, and then you have Tim Roth as the kind of the I'd say the main villain.
Yeah, he becomes...
And Tim Roth is great.
Tim Roth is great, but in this movie, he's got to be like the, I'm kind of crazy guy.
He's like, I want to, give me Bruce's blood. And
right.
It's like,
and,
what? No.
And this is another theme of the Marvel films, is the villain is a guy who just goes crazy for kind of no reason.
Right. It's like they did I would say that Jeff Bridges as Warmonger was actually pretty decent as a, you know, you're going to bankrupt this company. I'm making millions off of this. Like,
it's passable. It's fine.
He's very Lex Luthor-esque.
Yes, it doesn't ruin the film.
Right, but like after that, it's very much like Marvel villains are weak to poor.
Yeah. So I think another major problem with this movie is that there's just not really any stakes.
Right.
Like it's, okay, Banner's on the run at the beginning of the movie, and then at the end, he's like, okay, Banner's still on the run after he defeated Abomination. Again, it's the Hulk, so it's a movie about the Hulk, so this is difficult to do.
Right.
But the fight at the end is just a big CG monster fighting a big CG monster
through the streets of Harlem.
And I feel like it's the same problem that this is another movie, Van Helsing with Hugh Jackman and Kate Beckinsale. Like, not a great movie.
No, very bad. The CG.
Yeah, it is. But the end of that movie is like a giant like vampire creature fighting a giant werewolf.
Right.
And it's CG'd out the ass, and it's just like, this is completely uninteresting. Like, who cares?
Right, and it's like, I mean, it kind of comes with being the Hulk, you know?
Right.
Like, as much as Abomination hits the Hulk, it's not going to kill the Hulk. We know that.
Yeah.
So there's no moment where like, oh, he's got him on the ropes. It's like the Hulk's just going to fucking come back.
It's not nearly as bad, and it's on a much smaller scale, but it reminds me a lot of the fight between Superman and Zod in Man of Steel.
It's just two big things punching each other.
It's just two bags of meat just hitting each other up against things, and it's not interesting. There's no drama. There's no emotional weight to anything that's happening.
Right.
It's a movie about the Hulk, and there's just not a lot there because we're not surrounded by secondary and tertiary characters who are interesting or infuse the movie with a little bit more life and vitality.
Right.
It's just really hard to care.
Yeah.
It's just hard to care, man.
And it's really weird because, like we said earlier, they keep a lot of things from this, but they really ignore a lot of other things from this.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I know, do you remember the leader is in this movie?
No idea.
Yeah, they set up the leader, one of Marvel's like biggest well-known villains, and it's now he's gone. You can't use him anymore. He just disappears.
It's the guy from Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?
Yeah, he gets like a cut in his head, and some of Bruce's blood gets into it, and like his head starts to morph up, and it's like, oh cool, the leader's gonna come back in Incredible Hulk 2, right?
Nah.
No.
Hey, but here's something that is cool: is if you buy the Blu-ray for the Incredible Hulk, it's a green case.
Ooh, mine isn't. Mine's blue. I got screwed.
You got screwed.
Damn it. The only other things I keep from this is like Thunderbolt Ross.
Right.
Shows back up in Civil War. Of course, if you count the after credits scene where Tony Stark comes in and talks to Ross about like, hey, setting up a team, here you have a problem. You know?
Exactly.
Which I remember that was like the first thing that I was like, holy shit, this is actually happening.
Yeah, that's the one thing that Incredible Hulk did is it really set up the idea with that stinger at the end
cemented it.
Yeah, this is going to be a shared universe and like things are coming together.
Right.
The Avengers is going to happen.
I saw someone drive-in now that I think about it. You know what the double feature film was? It was The Mummy 3, like the Dragon Tomb or whatever. It was The Mummy 3, Rise of the Dragon.
With Jet Li.
Yes.
And not Rachel Weisz.
Right, but still Brendan Fraser.
Yeah, well, he wasn't doing much else.
All I remember is that on the screen behind it, they were playing The Dark Knight, and that's what I watched. I did not watch Rise of the Mummy Dragons. But that's not what this podcast is about. That's way off topic.
So, right, and no, I don't think there's very many people out there that talk about how great the Incredible Hulk is. Yeah. So this isn't very controversial. Now we're going to kind of get into the realm of movies that other people think might be a little bit better than we do.
I'm not sure if this next one is considered good, though.
Right. So,
I think that some people do kind of scoff at this next one still.
Yeah, next movie in the first wave of Marvel movies was Iron Man 2.
Right. Which this, oddly enough, Iron Man 2 is the last film that Marvel Studios did before being acquired by Disney.
Ah, okay. Yeah, and I kind of have a lot to say about this movie because I just rewatched this movie, Thor, and Captain America, the First Avenger, in preparation for recording this episode, and those are the next three movies that we're going to talk about here.
Iron Man 2 is on every time after Iron Man, so I unfortunately have watched it a little bit.
So, I hadn't seen this movie since its release, and when it came out, I wasn't a big fan of it, and rewatching it, I don't think it's quite as terrible as I thought it was the first time around, but it definitely is not good. It has its problems.
Yes.
So, there's a lot going on in this movie. I think the kind of two biggest issues that I have with Iron Man 2,
Cheadle?
No, Don Cheadle's fine. It's a really weak villain.
Yes.
So
Villains.
yeah, but I don't mind Sam Rockwell's Justin Hammer. Like
I think he's actually really good.
I think so too. Like I like the idea that there's this rival company that's run kind of by like this weaselly guy who wants to be Tony Stark, but he's clearly not Tony Stark.
And he's kind of trying to usurp Tony Stark by It kind of feels like a Luther versus Wayne kind of thing.
He wants the government contracts. Like I kind of like that idea. Now that's not necessarily an effective threat for Tony Stark.
Right.
But I really like the idea. We get Mickey Rourke as Whiplash.
Mickey Rooney.
Mickey Rooney as Whiplash.
Just yelling at everything.
He's in the same makeup from Breakfast at Tiffany's where he's super Asian. Oh, man. He should be the Mandarin. Mickey Rooney as the Mandarin.
Yeah, let's get this going.
Hashtag Rooney for Mandarin.
Too bad he passed away like 3 years ago.
No, it doesn't matter.
Bring him back. He's like, I'm Mickey Rooney.
Oh my god, that would have been just so epically terrible.
I'm the Mandarin.
That is like Highlander 2 levels of awfulness. So, Whiplash, like not a terribly exciting villain.
Right.
The trailer for this movie and the first, like the opening scene.
The trailer I remember being really good.
Yes, because the trailer sets up the idea that Whiplash, Ivan
Von Ooze.
Ivan Von Ooze.
Allow me to introduce myself. I'm the galactically feared, globally reviled, universally despised. They call me Ivan Ooze.
Ivan Von Ooze. So Whiplash's character, Mickey Rourke, his father worked on like the original arc reactor project with Tony Stark's father, Howard Stark. So, and then he was cast out and he never got any of the fame or any of the money or anything like that.
Because he was a commie.
But the idea is that from Mickey Rourke's perspective, Iron Man's father fucked over his father, so he has a vendetta against Iron Man.
Right, because Iron Man, he sees Tony Stark as incredibly wealthy.
Yeah.
He's doing very, very well. While Mickey Rourke's father is dying in his arms, and like they're living in this cold Siberian house that's broken down, there's no heating.
And that's a really cool idea. And they touch on these themes a little bit in the first Iron Man, where Tony Stark is like, okay, I'm going to convert my company from making primarily weapons into doing this.
Right.
And they even touch on that a little bit in Age of Ultron, where Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver their village was bombed when they were a little kid.
Their house even was hit by a bomb.
And it was a Stark Industries bomb. Yeah, so like that concept is kind of interesting. It's immediately dropped.
Yes.
Like they introduced in that very first scene and they really set this tone of this is going to be a little bit darker, this is going to be a little bit more serious, and then it's just gone from the rest of the movie.
Yeah, then he's oh my god, so he spits on him, and it's great.
And Mickey Rourke spends the majority of this movie sitting around not doing anything.
Well, and making a joke about a bird.
Yes, and they try to set him up as like this intimidating guy. There's the scene with the Monte Carlo racetrack.
Right, which is actually pretty decent.
That is pretty good, but then they stop him. And then he goes to jail, and he gets helped out of jail by Justin Hammer, Sam Rockwell's character.
Yep.
And then for the next, 40 minutes of the movie, he's just, working on a suit or working on the drones. And there's no tension built there. And then at the end...
It's just another army of robots.
Yeah. At the end of Iron Man 1, Iron Man fights a guy in another Iron Man suit.
Right.
And at the end of Iron Man 2, he fights a bunch of drone Iron Man.
And then
another guy in an Iron Man suit.
Right.
And it's just kind of boring.
Whiplash's character design, especially in the Monte Carlo race, is awesome. His suit looks very put together. Yeah. He's just wearing pants.
It reminds you of in the first movie when Tony Stark had to just kind of build things out of scrap parts. Whiplash's character builds his suit out of just what's laying around.
It looks like it's held together by duct tape.
Yeah, and it builds up his kind of resourcefulness.
Right.
And then that's just not really a factor anymore.
But even still with that shot, it perfectly parallels. It's the idea that hey, he's just like Tony Stark, but he's down a different path that he is.
Yes.
He is able to build suits just like Tony Stark. However, he has a vendetta. He wants revenge. He's got this negative mindset.
Yeah. I think they really should have leaned into the idea that Whiplash's father was betrayed by Howard Stark, and that's why there's this vendetta. But they kind of touch on that, but then they immediately throw it away because there's a line, it might even be Samuel L. Jackson, Nick Fury, but somebody's talking to Stark about who Whiplash is, who Ivan is.
Right.
And they mention oh yeah, his father worked for Howard Stark, but then he basically went crazy, and then so Howard Stark threw him out, and then he went back to his own government, and his own government didn't want him. So they basically just say, yeah, Ivan's father was just a crazy asshole,
Right.
which renders the whole idea about Ivan being like angry at Tony Stark for what his father did to his father, it renders that kind of moot again, because you're removing all of like the drama and the conflict out of it, and you're just saying, well, Ivan's father was a bad guy, so who cares?
Well, and that's why I brought up the idea, kind of a joke, that his dad, like the way they should have done it is his dad should have been like a communist supporter. That was a big thing, and like that there were people in America that supported the Communist Party. They were kind of blacklisted.
Yeah, you could do it that way, but I think even more interesting is Howard Stark and Ivan's father could have just had some like disagreement or conflict of ideas that wasn't necessarily, you want to use this for good and you want to use this for bad. Like, yeah, you could have, and this is not necessarily the movie to do this in, but you could have built the idea that like from the communist perspective, like that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just a different idea. I don't know if Iron Man 2 is the movie to really make that point. But the idea is that since you've made Ivan's father just a bad guy through exposition,
it completely nullifies his backstory.
Yeah, it makes his conflict. It removes your ability to identify with Whiplash's character.
Right.
So like that's a big problem. The other really big problem that I have with this movie, it starts out kind of okay. Like we were talking about the Monte Carlo race, and like that's all really good. There's the part where Tony Stark gives control of the company to Pepper Potts, and like that's kind of interesting. Like that shows a development of his character, like he's relinquishing control, and it gives her something to do, because a lot of female characters in a lot of these movies don't really get anything to do. We get Scarlett Johansson as Black Widow, which is kind of interesting. We get some good stuff there. There's some humor. There's a lot of really good quips and lines and things in this movie, just like in the first one. And then the plot kind of gets to this point where, because Tony Stark, the reactor core is like poisoning him.
Right.
And a big through line of the movie is that he has to figure out a way to like synthesize a new element in order for the cores to not kill him, essentially, for him to live.
Like, I guess green, quote unquote, way of helping him.
So that's a big center point in this movie, and it's kind of resolved in a super clunky way that doesn't really make any sense. Yeah,
because doesn't he watch like this like old tape of his dad?
Yes, he watches an old video recording of his dad talking about how the project, the area or whatever that he's building is the key to the success.
Right.
And then he finds the model of that area, that observatory. It's somehow
like the molecular structure
in Pepper's office, and then he brings up a simulation of it with Jarvis, and he figures out, the arrangement of this buildings is the same thing as the molecular structure of this new element that I now have to synthesize, and he has to like build this.
And he shoots a fucking laser at like a piece of glass.
It's so clunky. Like there's exposition that doesn't cover it, and then it's just like Jarvis is like, congratulations, you have synthesized a new element, and I'm like, what?
It's like Starknanium.
You just fucking made all that shit up. Like there's no.
It's very Star Trek.
So the dad built a complex that was in the shape of the molecular structure that would be used to synthesize the element that would power this reactor that he hadn't invented yet. Like it's so clunky. Like it's so bad.
Right. It's ugh.
And that's like, it's like 15 to 20 minutes of the movie where the movie like just stops. It's like a big revelation for him. And it's played as if the audience is supposed to be like, oh, that's it. Like he figured it out. But
set up like 5 minutes earlier.
But it's not even that. It's just like you didn't breadcrumb anything. It's not a mystery that the audience gets to figure out. It's just you explaining, like, unlike the first film, Tony Stark is the exact same character, more or less, at the end of Iron Man 2 that he is at the beginning of Iron Man 2. And his triumph over his affliction is cheapened by the fact that nothing is earned. Like, the audience doesn't make any discoveries. We're merely told what is happening with the synthesizing of this element. Like, there's no discovery to it at all.
Yeah, and it doesn't feel earned.
No, it doesn't. It's very, very arbitrary. And it's very removed from the rest of the conflict in the movie with Whiplash and Justin Hammer. There's not a through line. There's not a crossover between these two conflicts. He's not doing this
because they did it to him or something.
Yeah, and your A plot doesn't necessarily always have to like connect with your B plot in that way. but it feels like the movie was written by two different people.
Right.
And they kind of just glued some stuff together. And that's a problem that persists down the line with Marvel movies. And it gets way, way worse later on.
Right. And I've talked about this before with, I think, our most disappointing films podcast episode. I'm not sure. I think that's what it was. We're talking about Iron Man 3 and how Iron Man 3 tries to do this PTSD story, but they throw it out of the way.
Yeah.
One of the biggest character elements of Iron Man is that for a long period of time, he dealt with drug abuse and he deals with alcoholism. And in this movie, they start to build this. They start to have him like he's drunk all the time. His alcohol levels are like through the roof. He's hurting his friends. He's throwing these weird parties and like he's ruining his life essentially. But then he has a donut and it's over.
Yeah, then it's just dropped.
And it's like that's a big character moment of Iron Man is like him overcoming his alcoholism and his drug addiction to help, to keep Pepper Potts around, to help Rhodey, to, join the Avengers and help them out. And, like, I get that they couldn't do drug addiction in a Marvel film. That's probably a taboo topic for it.
Right.
They still tried at the alcoholism. And it's like, if you're not going to do it, then don't set it up.
I agree.
And then abandon it.
Yeah, at the end of the day, it's still kind of a kid's movie. Like, it has to be a family-friendly film.
That's BS.
They set up his alcoholism, like you said, and there's the one scene in particular where they have the big party, and he's kind of drunk in the Iron Man suit.
With DJ AM, passed away like 2 years after that movie.
That sucks.
Yep.
But it's very, very hollow. Like, there's no... The idea that Tony Stark his reactor core is poisoning him, and then he is poisoning himself through alcoholism.
Right.
Like, that's a theme. Like, latch onto that.
Right.
That's interesting. You can tell a story about that. And you might even be able to roll that into the idea that Howard Stark took away the legacy of Ivan's father. And, like, you could roll all of those kind of negative connotation things.
Shadow too.
Yeah, like, you could set up the idea that... This is an idea. You could set up the idea that Ivan, through a lack of resources, is resourceful enough to build the suit to make him become Whiplash and let him do these things. And Tony Stark, who has every advantage in the world, is sitting there drinking himself to death. And his lack of ingenuity with his reactor core is poisoning him. Like, that's kind of an interesting concept and an interesting juxtaposition of who the villain and who the hero are. Right. And you can make something out of that.
And it kind of blurs those lines.
It does blur those lines, but in this movie, they just make Whiplash out to be like he's a bad guy because he's a bad guy.
Yeah.
And at first, he seems kind of reluctant to be the bad guy. Like, he's just doing it for his family. But then when he, like, escapes the prison, like, he kills the one guy and snaps his neck and blows him up.
Killing.
And then, but at the end, when he's controlling all of the drones, like, the drones aren't shooting people. They're just shooting at Iron Man.
Right, they're focusing on him and War Machine.
But then he's, like, activate. So, like, we don't get a sense of what he's willing to do. Like, is he willing to kill people for his goal? They kind of have this idea that he just wants to, like, ruin the legacy of Iron Man.
And that's weak.
But then that doesn't really go anywhere. Again, you could really sell that if the movie was about the betrayal of Howard Stark and Ivan's father, and like if that carried through. But they just kind of, like you said, they brush that aside. And I think ultimately the biggest problem with Iron Man 2 is it doesn't have a central theme. It doesn't have a central idea.
Yeah.
And you really feel that throughout the film.
Well, and I think one of the biggest scenes in that movie is so horribly done that it ruins it for me. And that's in the party scene. Don Cheadle's character tries to stop Tony Stark and tries to get him back on the right path. And in doing so, he actually dons, for the first time, his own Iron Man suit. And the two of them clash. And instead of it being like an emotional fight, like, I have to stop my friend from hurting himself, it's got like goofy sound effects.
It's played
and they're having fun.
Yeah, it's played for gags. It really is.
It ruins it. Like, that should be an emotional, like, high point of that movie.
It could have been the type of thing where you start it and it's kind of funny, but then, like, as the fight goes on, like, the music changes, and it slowly deteriorates and it gets more serious. And at the end, we have Rhodey being like, you fucked up, man.
Yeah, and I mean, it gets to that, but it gets to it so suddenly that it's more like jarring.
It's played for laughs, played for laughs. And then
all of a sudden they're both pointing the reactors at each other.
And then it just stops. And it's
then he yells at them.
Yeah, and they shoot their beams at each other, and that's to set up for the end of the movie when they defeat Whiplash together.
Right.
And like the fight between, that was another problem. Like, Whiplash gets to the scene, and then literally 45 seconds later,
they blow his suit up.
Yeah, it's over. It's just like and this is another problem that we're gonna have in the next couple movies too, where like the finale is just so anticlimactic
Right.
that it doesn't leave you with any weight or impact. It's just kind of like, oh, okay.
Right.
Like
The credits are starting. Okay.
That's the end of the movie.
Yeah, and it's not well done. And I mean, the biggest thing that you and I always joke about with this movie is that 80% of the dialogue is just crappy banter.
Yeah, it's Pepper Potts and Tony yelling at each other. And after rewatching it, like, it's not as bad as I remember it, but it's still not good.
It's not good. Like, you can have them banter and fight a lot, but there needs to be a reason. It's not just, it's funny. They just do it because it's funny.
Yeah, I think it really works in the very first scene where he makes her CEO. Like, it really works there very well. And then after that, it's just kind of like...
It's kind of obnoxious.
Yeah, it's just
kind
of
obnoxious. It's like your two friends from high school who are still dating, and you're just like, all right.
Yeah.
We need to stop. On to the next one. So, the next one, I think, has some exceptions to our problems with the Marvel films. Mainly that the next one does take risks while still playing it semi-safe. And the next one has arguably the best villain in the Marvel universe so far. That is, of course, Thor. We're talking about Loki because
the villain
Jesus Christ.
Right, the villain is Loki and the movie is Thor.
Right. People seem to love Loki like 100 times more than any freaking Marvel hero.
Yeah, and I think that's very indicative of the universe at large, because a big complaint about the Marvel movies from a lot of people is that the villains just aren't very memorable, and I think this is the one exception to the rule, really.
And that's why they've used him 3 times as the villain.
Yeah, like this movie does a really good job of setting up the idea that Loki is kind of this tragic character because his origin is not what he thinks it is. He's not necessarily really the son of Odin, and he feels kind of betrayed. After rewatching the movie, I think that they could have stuck the landing a little bit better. It's
very like it's again, it's like Iron Man 2. It's very heavy hit, and then it stopped.
Yeah.
They set it up with a lot of emotional weight, and then it's kind of just dropped eventually.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it does it better in Thor than the other movies do. But anyway, let's get into it. So one of the very first things I noticed about this movie at the very beginning is when Odin is talking to young Thor and young Loki, and he's like, only one of you can be king. So, don't hate each other for forever because fuck you. Like, only one of you can be king. I was like, that's a really weird opening.
He's a bad parent. He's very Zeus.
Next thing, so many Dutch angles. Right. So many unnecessary Dutch angles in this movie, which if you're not familiar, Dutch angles are when you tilt the camera and it's supposed to like put the watcher at an uneasy position. Like
it's an emphasis of like uncertainty or nervousness. I guess they just confused Dutch for Nordic or something. But it's weird, and there's so much good performances though in this movie with Tom Hiddleston and Chris Hemsworth. And freaking Idris Elba is super underused in this movie.
Yeah, and going back and rewatching this, it made me appreciate
Did you see how I didn't mention Kat Dennings?
Going back and watching this, I was really impressed by how good Chris Hemsworth is in this movie.
Yes.
Like, he has a very hard job. He has to sell Thor, which is very like, I am the son of Odin and I am important. And but he does it and he's charismatic in the role. And I was, again, props to that guy because he does a really, really good job.
Well, and the big thing is, I would say that Thor and Iron Man weren't even within the top 10 of people's superhero characters before these films.
Yeah.
No one knows him. And that's kind of the dangers of making a Thor movie, especially this early on in the Marvel Universe.
Right. And they get Kenneth Branagh to direct it, who's very famous for directing Shakespeare movies. So it was an interesting choice. But it doesn't feel like a Kenneth Branagh movie with all of these Dutch angles and that sort of thing.
Right.
And I think that Thor has less problems than Iron Man 2, certainly. But there were just a few, and these are minor things, but these are the things that I see in movies, and it really kind of breaks my immersion. So when Thor and his buddies go to Jotunheim,
the ice giants,
to fight against the frost giants, what are the frost giants doing?
Well, no, that's the thing is they're all sitting there.
That's their
life.
They just sit there. They're just waiting for people to show up.
Well, they know.
And their home is this desolate wasteland of ice, which that's fine. But the issue is that later on when we find out that, Loki was a frost giant child.
Right.
And we see Loki as a little baby and he's got the blue skin. So they're civilized enough to have their children and keep them safe or that sort of thing. And there was a battle and that's kind of glossed over very quickly by Anthony Hopkins as Odin. But then, like, when we go to them in present day, they're just waiting around, like they're not doing anything.
Right, and they're kind of made out to be like barbarians.
Yeah, and you can do that. Like, there's many movies where like the bad guy is just sitting in their lair, like waiting for the heroes to show up, and I get that.
Right.
But at the beginning of the film,
they're sitting in their world, not their lair.
You specifically set up the idea that there was a war between Asgard and Jotunheim, like the Frost Giants and the Asgardians, and it's straight ripped from Lord of the Rings. Like, that battle scene looks exactly like the opening to Fellowship of the Ring.
Yep.
Whatever, cool. So, but you set up the idea that they're warring against each other, and then a peace is struck. The Frost Giants like kind of lose their ability to fight, and then you specifically say, okay, there's a peace struck between these, and the fighting halts because of Odin. Whereas in something like Lord of the Rings, like the bad guys are just defeated, so they have a reason to kind of just be like back in Mordor,
right? They're licking
gathering
their
strength, licking their wounds, exactly. Whereas, and again, like they surrender, like the Frost Giants surrender, but to me, they're set up in a way that you would expect them to have lives. Like, they should be doing something.
You wanted like a Frost Chicago?
Not even. I don't even.
Frost
I don't
taxis.
need that much. I just like. It would be one thing if they got to Jotunheim and the Frost Giants were like in the middle of something and they were surprised that Thor and his crew arrived there. And that's not what happens. Like, they just show up and it's just a desolate wasteland.
It's like a rock planet.
Right. And even one of them says something like, where are all the Frost Giants? And like, oh, they're hiding. Have they just been hiding for years and years and years?
Yeah.
Like, it just, that really bothered me, that the Frost Giants aren't, like, you try to set them up as people, but then they don't act like people. They're just there to be like the bad monsters.
Right.
So that bothers me.
It's funny that that's what's bothered you, because my biggest problem with this movie is I hate the fish out of water storyline.
Oh, I'm getting there. I was
gonna say you better, because that's the movie's crux.
So and this is another really small thing, but the other thing that I have a problem with in this movie, I've paid really close attention. There is exactly one shot of Asgard where people are shown like walking around Asgard.
Oh, that's a lot of people complain about that.
There is exactly one. So
because Thor: The Dark World actually like tries to fix that by showing several scenes.
Because so again, and this is a point that I've made before on the podcast, but when we get all these sweeping shots of Asgard, this beautiful city made of gold and diamonds and the bridge and all of this, and nobody fucking lives there, because the only people that we see are the people inside of the council room in the ceremony where Thor is just about to be made king. And
then he gets mulliganed. Right.
And then, of course, the Frost Giants show up or whatever. So the only time we see people that live in Asgard outside of this council chamber, there is exactly one shot of the camera like sweeps up over a hill, and we get to see like flea-sized people walking around the streets of Asgard. That's it.
Right.
This is important because, and I've mentioned this before, but like movies like Lord of the Rings or TV shows like Game of Thrones or that sort of thing, anytime you have like a Gondor or a Helm's Deep or a Rohan or a King's Landing, that sort of thing, they take the time to establish, hey, these are the people that live here. There's like 4 or 5 or 6 like establishing shots of an old woman, sweeping the streets, or a mother, or a marketplace, people buying stuff, or a mother feeding her child, or just something to where
make it living.
Yeah, you've made a living, breathing world.
Right.
So when the plot of your movie, which this very much is all about how you've brought the Frost Giants here, like there's going to be a war, you've threatened all the people of Asgard. What people of Asgard? You haven't shown us anything.
Hiding, like the Frost Giants.
This is a movie. You have to visually tell us.
That's the rules of the Thor universe. Everyone has to hide.
Everyone's hiding all the time
until someone shows up that's not welcome.
And again, it's a very, very minor thing, but these are the things that I notice in movies where that's like movie making 101.
Right.
Like, these people are being threatened. That's central to your plot. Show the people that are being threatened. Like, make me feel the emotion. Make me feel the weight of these are the people that are in danger. And the movie just doesn't do that.
Right.
Super weak.
Right, but I think the movie doesn't even get better after it leaves Asgard. Like, when it finally has the opportunity to show Thor's interaction with another world when he's banished in a wonderful scene where, like, Odin, I love that scene where he speaks into the hammer.
Yes.
And then he, like, throws it down.
Yes.
That's amazing.
That scene when Anthony Hopkins is like, you're a child, and Thor's like, and you're an old man and a fool.
The 9 realms laugh at us, The old ways are done. You'd stand giving speeches while Asgard falls.
You are a vain, greedy, cruel boy!
And you are an old man and a fool!
Right.
Like, that's great. That is like that.
It's
that
like, cast you out.
That's the Kenneth Branagh, man. That's the Shakespeare. That's the acting, and like that's okay because this movie is about larger than life characters, and it's okay if they're acting. You know,
Right.
and like it works.
Well, I mean, they are very Shakespearean. Like,
Yes.
they're dressed the same. It's very like Victorian era clothing.
Yes,
it really fits with it.
Yeah, that tone really, really works.
Right. The movie for me, very much so like the next movie we're going to talk about, drops at this point. As soon as he gets to Earth, I lose a lot of interest. And I think the movie loses a lot of its charm.
Quote unquote.
There's quotes around this. Charm. No offense to Skarsgård, like, he's fine. But Natalie Portman and Kat Dennings are terrible in this movie.
I don't disagree. I think with Natalie Portman, she doesn't have anything to do except fawn over Chris Hemsworth.
Well, and she is used as our eyes into his world.
Right.
Like, his explaining of, like, the classic line that was in every trailer of this movie.
Your ancestors called it magic, and you call it science. Well, I come from a place where they're one and the same thing.
Like, she is seeing what his world is like and the rules of his world so that we can understand it.
Yeah.
That is her whole purpose in this movie.
And it's okay, like it's important to have a character that isn't familiar with everything in the universe so that the audience can be exposed in that way. Like you just said, Natalie Portman is our key to understanding the rest of, you know, how Asgard works and how these people who are basically gods work.
Right.
That's important. But yeah, like you said, like she just doesn't get anything to do besides that.
Well, and I don't need Facebook jokes with Chris Hemsworth's Thor.
I
don't need, like, the funny scene where Kat Dennings is like, man, he's super hot. I don't need that.
So I think that while I agree with you in principle, I think that Kat Dennings' presence in the movie makes it a little bit more tolerable because it's
a lot of people would disagree with you.
Well, here's my reasoning, because it's a little bit of an injection of personality,
right?
Because again, Thor is a character that is kind of boring.
Yeah, he's very traditional.
He's kind of like the Hulk in that it's very difficult to just make a Thor movie.
Right.
So you have to surround him with these kind of secondary characters. And they really lucked out with Tom Hiddleston playing Loki.
Yes.
And they have Anthony Hopkins.
Yep.
They have Rene Russo, who doesn't do anything in this movie.
Nope.
You know, they have Skarsgård, and like he's okay. He's kind of like this eccentric scientist guy. Natalie Portman doesn't get anything to do. I know a lot of people don't like the fact that Kat Dennings is in this movie as kind of like the comedy relief.
Right.
But I think if she wasn't there, it would be more awkward. Like there would be this hole here because this movie's not fantastic, but it kind of gets by on the personalities and the charms of the characters. And I think that if Kat Dennings was removed, you would really notice that missing.
Well, but then you just make Natalie Portman interesting.
Yes,
that's my argument. You just write her character better.
That is a good counter.
Because Kat Dennings, her comedic style and her timing is just garbage. She's terrible. She is horrible. And the fact that everyone hated her performance in this movie, and then they had the balls to put her in Dark World, the very first thing that everyone said was, why the hell did you bring Kat Dennings back?
I will say this. I will disagree slightly. I will say she's okay. Like, she's not great.
It's probably the worst thing you can say on this podcast.
I'm not super happy about that fact, but I think that her presence brings a little bit to the film that the film really needed, because just the kind of the lack of interesting characters that surround Thor, which leads me to my next point. Thor's friends, his like 4 buddies.
Yes. Civ and those other ones.
They don't do anything in this movie. Like they are not given personalities. So is it Lady Civ, Lady Sif?
I think it's Civ.
Doesn't matter. Anyway, so the
woman that should have been Wonder Woman.
The woman that should have been Wonder Woman, yes. So Lady Sif, she has exactly 2 moments of characterization in this movie.
Yep.
There is a moment where when Thor's friends go to New Mexico and the giant robot attacks.
The giant robot.
God, Marvel. The giant robot attacks that New Mexico town, and Lady Sif is there, and she has a line where she tells Thor, she says something along the lines of like, I will fight and die a warrior's death. And that gives the audience 1 iota into her as a character.
Yep.
And then there's one moment at the end of the movie where Lady
says
Sif,
the same thing.
she's talking to Rene Russo, Thor's mother, and she says something to the effect that leads you to believe that she might have feelings for Thor.
Right.
And that's not explored until the next movie.
Right.
So,
and it goes nowhere there either.
Right. But so like those are two moments where Lady Sif gets to be a kind of interesting character. The rest of the movie she has nothing to do.
Right.
The three other characters, there's the guy with the
dwarf
big
guy.
beard. Yeah, there's Gimli. Yeah, there's Legolas. And then there's Jet Li, and who's not actually Jet Li.
Right.
But those three guys get nothing to do in this
Right.
entire movie. Like
Hey, Gimli waves.
they
He waves really happy.
they
He's
don't
like,
get
"Oh."
anything to do.
Right.
And so like when they show up and they're like, "Hey Thor, we're here for you. We're your friends." Like we don't care. Like
Wow,
there's been no establishment.
This is funny because I feel like this might come back in like 5 minutes.
Yes, exactly. So like it's such a problem. Like they're not given personalities. They're all four of them are just kind of quippy and
Right.
kind of like fun loving.
We're really skilled soldiers who
they're
are
just-
good friends of Thor.
Yeah, they're just like a group. They don't have individual personalities. And so like we as the audience don't really get attached to them. And then that moment where they show up and Thor's like, "Great, my friends are here." Like how much more effective would it be if we felt like Thor, like, "Yes, your friends are here." Like how fucking awesome is it? Again, like in Lord of the Rings, right? And again,
Right.
those movies are way long and they have time to establish their characters. But like how great is it that moment where like Sam shows up to go with Frodo into Mordor and he's like, "I can't swim, but I'm coming with you." And you're just like,
Honestly,
yes.
it's garbage.
Like these two friends
I hate
are
that scene.
shut up. These two friends are like coming together and
When he swims and
you're
he can't
just
even
like
swim.
you're just like, okay, I get it. Like this has emotional weight to me. And then
Right.
like Aragorn and Legolas and Gimli, they're like, "We have to go rescue Merry and Pippin. Like we cannot leave them to their fates." Like when these characters in these movies come back together, you're excited. You're like, "Yes, these characters that I really like are coming back together." And like just none of that is in Thor.
Or you're just me and you're checking the clock to see how much longer the runtime is.
Just again, we have to care about these characters, and they do such a good job of that with Chris Hemsworth. He has a thankless role playing Thor, just the
Yep.
most boring, lack of personality character ever, and he nails
he
it.
somehow does it.
He nails it, and he's just given nothing to work with. Great for him. Good job, man. So yeah, Thor is, and there's other problems too, but just it's a giant robot.
Yep.
Stop putting
Giant robot with lasers.
Stop doing the robots. Like who cares?
It's gonna be Doctor Strange. Like
God, stop doing
Mads
robots.
Mikkelsen is going to like summon like a giant robot. He's gonna be like, "Now, Doctor Strange."
Okay, so anyway, that's Thor. It's not the worst movie ever, but again, it just these Marvel movies, they miss these little things that that would take their movies from being just kind of mediocre to really good and memorable, and it's just not there.
It's really underwhelming.
It is super underwhelming. That's the perfect word for it.
And I mean, like they get better in Phase 2.
Kind
but
of.
Still not so much.
Kind of.
Phase 3 though, so far, A+. You did great with Captain America. You got 1 for 1.
Speaking of Captain America,
Uh-oh.
the last movie we're going to talk about today is Captain America: The First Avenger.
Or just the first Avenger.
If you're not in America.
Right, and you don't like us.
So, I have a lot to say about this movie too, but I talked a lot, so I'm going to let you go.
Okay, so this movie, we talked about it a little bit beforehand when we talked about The Rocketeer.
Yes.
It's directed by Joe Johnston, same guy. And I've kind of told you my two kind of biggest problems with this movie. Not my biggest, but two problems I have with this movie that are not present, and that is the lack of American symbolism and the lack of the Nazi Party. After just rewatching it, it's there. It needs to be more there, though.
Yeah, and after rewatching it, I think they're really trying to hammer home the idea that Hydra is the villain in this movie and not just
Hitler.
the Nazis and Hitler. And that's a delicate line to walk. And I feel I agree with you that this is the movie. If you're gonna do a movie set in the Marvel universe that takes place during World War II, you have a great opportunity to really sell this is straight good versus straight evil.
This is patriotism versus swastika.
Tyranny. Like this is your opportunity to really sell, and they kind of don't do that.
Yeah, and we were talking about this beforehand that this movie to me feels like a 3.5 hour film that had about an hour and a half cut out of it. Because there is so much stuff in it that you and I were talking while watching it, that it was like, they should have put a scene in like this. They should have done something like this.
Yeah.
Oh, well, where's this scene? This scene feels like it's missing. There's a lot of moments that I kind of feel like this film overall has beats, and it's got these story beats, and they have zero idea how they get from each beat. So they just did the most basic, most bland way to go from A to B to C, instead of trying to creatively construe, like, what happens to Bucky? Who's this team he's with? Who is Bucky Barnes?
Right. So yeah, the tone of this movie just doesn't really stay consistent, and that fact is very personified by, at the beginning of the movie, the scene at the World's Fair.
Yes.
All of the background and the scenery looks so computer generated.
Right.
Like it looks like a Baz Luhrmann movie. Like it looks like Moulin Rouge or
God.
like The Great Gatsby. Like it looks fake. It
Yes.
looks artificial.
It looks very like Las Vegas colors with
Yeah.
like bright neon lights and everything.
And so here's the idea, and this is kind of going in depth, but like, so Captain America, the reason that he is such a great hero is because you sympathize with him because he is so authentic.
Yep.
He is so sincere.
He's like the everyman.
He is, but he wears his heart on his sleeve, and he has no qualms about that. And that's why we love him as a character so much, because
Right.
he says he wants to do the right thing, and he does want to do the right thing, and he does the right thing. And we want to be him. Like, we
Yeah.
want that for ourselves. We want life to be that easy. We want to be able to overcome the difficulties in life so heroically and triumphantly like Captain America does. And that's what makes him great. So he's authentic.
Yeah.
And when you start your movie with this scenery that's super computer generated and it doesn't follow in the same style as the rest of the movie, because the rest of the movie, like all the sceneries, it's very Dick Tracy. It's very Raiders of the Lost Ark,
Right.
where it's all 1930s/40s scenery and it's kind of stylized, but it works because, again, it's kind of a comic book movie and it works with the tone because Captain America is a little bit over the top when he's like jumping around and, you know, he's kind of superhuman. But the scene at the World's Fair is so jarring that it kind of makes the rest, at least the first half of the movie for me, feel inauthentic. It feels very jovial and it feels very synthetic in that scene. And those are the most important scenes in the movie because you're establishing this is who Steve Rogers is, and you're not establishing who Bucky Barnes is,
Right.
which is the other big problem that we had with this movie where you're watching it. Bucky Barnes, especially later on in the franchise, becomes such an important character. He is the Winter Soldier. And the biggest complaint that I've had about the Winter Soldier is that movie relies so heavily on the relationship between Steve Rogers and Bucky Barnes, and that relationship is not thoroughly established before that.
all.
So in Captain America, the First Avenger, we get exactly 2 scenes with Bucky Barnes before Cap goes off to war.
Right.
And there's a scene where he gets saved from the bully, which that comes back into play later in this discussion, and the scene where they go to the World's Fair.
Right.
And then Bucky Barnes is like, I'm shipping off tomorrow. See you, dude. And then we go 40 minutes.
Easily.
40 minutes without seeing Bucky Barnes. And when we see him again, Captain America runs into this room that Dr. Zola just ran out of. And we see Bucky Barnes kind of laying there on a table. And there's no context for it. And it should be this triumphant moment because Captain America he's worried about his friend. He's
Right.
like, I've got to go in there and save my friend and save those other men. And it doesn't play that way. It's just kind of like, oh, hey, man, I haven't seen you in a while. Let's get out of here. Like, it's not impactful.
Right.
And so you had the idea that there should be a scene where we see Zola, like, hooking Bucky Barnes up to
Right.
some sort of machinery.
I mean, with this, we're going to be talking a lot about Winter Soldier also
Yeah.
on top of this, because Amik Zola survives through the events of Captain America, the First Avenger, and he ultimately is the one who brainwashes Bucky Barnes into becoming the murderer known as the Winter Soldier.
Yeah.
So they should have, this would have been a genius way to set this up without making it a trailer for Winter Soldier.
Yeah, and clearly, like, when Cap comes in that room, Bucky Barnes, he's laying on the table. He's completely separate from all the other men who are in jail cells.
Right.
And Zola runs out of that room. So there's some sort of implication there that, like, okay, Bucky Barnes is special, or like Zola had specifically pulling him out.
There is a line that is said that that's the experiment room. Nobody comes back from that.
Yeah, but like,
That's like the test room. That's where
sure,
they send
cool,
people.
but that's all we get is this throwaway exposition line, and it would have been so much more effective if we had gotten two things.
Yep.
Number one, we see Bucky Barnes and the unit that he's with. We hear about them, like, again, we are told through expositional dialogue that there was a mission and it failed and these guys got captured. And the first time we see them, they're in jail cells. How much more effective would it have been if we would have seen that mission fail from Bucky's perspective? Like, these guys are sneaking around, they're coming up on this Nazi base or whatever, and then the Hydra units come, they have their technology, these guys get overwhelmed, they get captured, and then there's a moment, like classic movie like shot, where the camera's focusing on Bucky Barnes' face, and then like he's looking at something that we, the audience, can't see, and like the shadow creeps over his face, and the music's like and it's implying like something big's about to happen, and then it cuts back to Captain America doing whatever. Then when Cap goes in and rescues those men and saves Bucky, we've already seen these men, and we've seen the fact that they were doing this mission and they were captured. We've seen the fact that another scene that should be there, that Bucky is being strapped to this equipment, or he's being experimented on, or we see some sort of reason why Zola has separated him from the rest of the group.
Right.
And then when Cap comes in and saves him, it's more impactful. It's like, yeah, awesome. Again, that same idea. Our heroes are back together. Like, I'm excited. This is great. And that's just missing. And the first half of this movie is so good. Like, all the scenes where Captain America, he's in the show and they're trying to like sell bonds, and there's like and he punches Hitler and the punch misses by 10 miles, and the kids are all like, behind you, Captain America, it's Hitler, it's Hitler. Like, that is all so good, and it's genuine and it's authentic, and you feel great watching it. Like, it's so good. Then there's the training montage where like Steve Rogers like jumps on the grenade and it's a dud and it doesn't go off, and like, so it shows you like this is where he's got heart. Like, that's the whole idea, is like his heart's in the right place. Like, he has the heart of a soldier.
Right.
And so on. And like, that's all really good stuff. And then while we were watching it, like, we pinpointed the exact moment where this movie kind of like takes a dip. It's right when Steve Rogers and the rest of the guys get back to the base after the big rescue. Agent Carter is there, and Bucky's like, hey, let's hear it for Captain America, and everybody claps. At that moment, the movie goes bonkers. The Red Skull, Hugo Weaving is the Red Skull, super effective.
Yeah.
Through the first half of this movie. He's very cunning, he's very conniving. He's talking about how you just don't understand science. You think it's magic because your mind is too small, and you were talking about while we were watching it, like, his plan is to kind of usurp Hitler and take over through this technology. That's all really, really good stuff.
Right.
Then when the Red Skull like takes off his mask and he's the Red Skull, all of a sudden he's Skeletor.
Stop him, you fools!
Yeah, he hams it up.
All of a sudden for the rest of the movie, he's like, damn you, Captain America, I'll get you next time. Like, he becomes that character.
Right.
And it's completely out of left field. Again, for the first half of this movie, he's super cunning and conniving, and he's a strategist. And then all of a sudden, he's just like, my plans, they're not working anymore. And it's so jarring.
Yeah.
And then, I'm sorry, I know I'm talking a whole lot about this movie, but I think the biggest misstep in this film, and I thought the same thing the first time I watched it, the whole theme of your movie is that Steve Rogers is this great hero. He is a good man, as Stanley Tucci, the scientist, tells him, like, stay a good man, and like points into his chest, and then as he dies, he points into his chest. Stay a good man. How great would it have been if at the end of this movie, and again, bear with me for a second, Steve Rogers, when he gets captured, there's a scene between just Captain America and the Red Skull. Very, very reminiscent of the scene in Casino Royale where James Bond, Daniel Craig, is being tortured by Mads Mikkelsen, Le Chiffre.
Right.
And he's got him in that room, and he's questioning him, and he's like, we've got your girl, she's going to die, all hope is gone. You have that scene in this movie. You don't have to have Captain America getting hit in the balls by a rope. But how awesome would it have been if Red Skull is like, and they hint at this, there's a couple lines where they talk about this. He has a line where he's like, you think you're just a soldier. You don't realize that we've left humanity behind. You and I, because we were exposed to the super soldier serum, like you and I are better than other people. We are gods.
Right.
That's a cool idea. Like take that idea, have this darker scene where Red Skull is talking to Captain America and being like, you and I are different. You and I are different than all these other people. We don't need them. You and I we could rule the galaxy as father and son, basically. Like have that moment and then have Red Skull like have to leave the room for some reason. Make it like a 3 or 4 minute long scene, make it dark, make it grim. Captain America's beat up, he's a little bloody. He got taken down. And then, his friends show up or whatever, and then Red Skull has to leave. And then when they have to fight each other on the plane later in the movie, you could have this moment where Captain America stands up to that idea. Because at the very beginning of this movie, what does he say? I don't like bullies. I could do this all day. I don't like bullies. And then the scientist, Stanley Tucci, is like, he's not a bully, and that's why I want him to participate in this program. How amazing would it be at the end of this movie when Red Skull, they're fighting each other, and Red Skull reiterates, like, what are you doing? Like, we're gods. Why are you fighting for these impudent weasels, these insects? And then Steve Rogers is like, I don't like bullies, and just decks Red Skull like into the Tesseract cube, and he explodes or something. Like, you end on, I don't like bullies, and your theme from the beginning of the film carries all the way through, and it has so much impact at the climax of this movie, because the actual climax of this movie is completely unexciting. It's boring.
Yeah.
Like, they get on the plane. There's the 4 dudes that jump in like the bomb planes that are labeled with the cities they're going to. That's so stupid. And then, like, so Captain America takes them down. He gets back on the plane and he fights Red Skull, and they throw like a couple punches, and then Red Skull like picks up the Tesseract cube and like explodes.
And that's it.
And it's just so anticlimactic. Like, it's not a fight. It's not a battle. It's not these two like titans, these two gods among men, like throwing down or like outsmarting each other, whatever. It's just he picks up the cube and he explodes. And it's so boring and dumb.
Yeah.
And like, that's the biggest misstep with this movie. There's so much good stuff with the performances they put on to sell Bonds, and the training and the special effects, and like Chris Evans, I haven't mentioned this yet. Chris Evans is so good. He's so good. Like, you feel that sincerity, that earnestness. Like, he really brings it to that role. And again, that's a very hard thing to do. It is hard to play the character that is boring and always wants to do the right thing. And he fucking nails it.
Yeah.
How awesome would that moment have been? I don't like bullies. Bam! And like, you recreate that iconic comic book cover of Captain America punching Hitler right across the face. Yeah. You have the movie end on this climactic moment of Captain America punching Red Skull in the face, the biggest bully there is, and he's telling him, I don't like bullies, and I'm gonna win. I'm gonna beat you. It's so good.
Yeah, it would really, really nail down more of the character motives and everything.
All right. That's my Captain America. Do you have anything to add?
No, I mean, the movie's, I think it's terrible. I really don't like Captain America. I think it's way too cheesy. I think it's really poorly shot in a lot of stuff.
I agree that it's poorly shot. And
it looks like garbage at times.
Yeah, the Baz Luhrmann stuff is real bad.
And its inconsistency of camera options is very jarring, and like, watching it a second time, I don't like it.
And yeah.
It's like, I liked it more the first time I saw it. The second time I saw it, I don't like it that much.
And this was another moment where, and I don't like this movie, but I think it gets a lot of things right. And I think I talk about this all the time. I think it's good enough that it should have been better.
Yeah.
The seeds of a great movie are here. They're just trapped under the concrete slab of mediocrity. It just is subpar.
Yeah, it's not very good.
And this is a problem that persists, I feel, in the majority of the Marvel movies. They don't take any chances. They don't take any risks. They try to make the safest movie possible,
right,
where here's our hero, here's our bad guy, he has to defeat him. There's no theme. There's no through line. There's no idea that carries you through the story. And this is the movie where they had the greatest opportunity to do that. I don't like bullies. And they didn't do it. They didn't do it.
Yeah.
It directs itself, man.
Yep, and
it writes itself.
I wouldn't say they ruined it, but they took a good idea and they made it a meh idea.
Yeah, just disappointing. So this has been our episode on the problem with Marvel movies. And it's Phase 1, and it's probably a topic that we're going to come back to. We'll talk more about the Phase 2 movies.
Because Phase 2 is more dynamic. Phase 2
I agree.
has a lot more highs and has a lot more lows.
You said it perfectly. Highs and lows, peaks and valleys.
Yep.
Like that really defines Phase 2.
But I feel like they're higher and lower than I feel like
definitely
all of Phase 1 is very mediocre.
Yeah.
Except for Iron Man and Avengers. I think it's very much middle of the road.
Yes.
I think Phase 2 has stuff like Guardians and Winter Soldier, which I think are both really, really decent. And then it has like Iron Man 3 and Thor the Dark World, which are both terrible. So... And Age of Ultron's down there too. So,
so hopefully you enjoyed this episode. If you did, or if you have a different opinion on the Marvel movies, or if you have the same opinion, you can let us know. You can find us on Facebook and Twitter, all at Pop Rant Radio. The show's available on Libsyn, the website that hosts the podcast, as well as iTunes. If you are listening on iTunes, do all the stuff. Subscribe. We say it every week. And as always, we'd like to thank Major for the theme songs.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. You are the man. And other than that, that is the show for this week. This is a long one. Thank you so much for listening, and we will see you next week.
Excelsior.
Excelsior!
Stanley exists.
Bye-bye.
Bye.